the Vimalakirti Sutra, Shariputra, at one point, he thinks, because they're in this house where they have thousands of people in this one room, this magic room, and thousands of people are in this magic room, along with many elderly people and many venerable saints and monks and things. But there's no chairs in the whole place. One of the properties of the Vimalakirti's magic house is that there are no chairs. So Shariputra is worried about it. He's very, very worried about this fact that there's no chairs, because he thinks to himself, there's not even a single chair in this house. Where are these disciples and bodhisattvas going to sit? So the Chavi Vimalakirti read the thought of the Venerable Shariputra and said, Reverend Shariputra, did you come here for the sake of the Dharma, or did you come here for the sake of a chair? Shariputra replied, oh, I came for the sake of the Dharma, not for the sake of a chair. And Vimalakirti continued, Reverend Shariputra, he who is interested in the Dharma is not interested even in his own body, much less in a chair. Reverend Shariputra, he who is interested in the Dharma has no interest in matter, sensation, intellect, motivation, or consciousness. He has no interest in these aggregates, nor in the elements, or in the sense media. Interested in the Dharma, he has no interest in the realm of desire, realm of matter, or the immaterial realm. Interested in the Dharma, he is not interested in attachment to the Buddha, attachment to the Dharma, or attachment to the Sangha. Reverend Shariputra, he who is interested in the Dharma is not interested in recognizing suffering, abandoning its origination, realizing its cessation, and practicing the path. Why? The Dharma is ultimately without formulation and without verbalization. Who verbalizes, suffering should be recognized, origination should be eliminated, cessation should be realized, the path should be practiced, is not interested in the Dharma, but interested in verbalization. And then he goes on and on, more and more with it. You know, the Dharma is without taint and free of defilement. He who is attached to anything, even to liberation, is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in the taint of desire. The Dharma is not an object. He who pursues objects is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in objects. The Dharma is without acceptance or rejection. He who holds on to things or lets go of things is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in holding and letting go. The Dharma is not a secure refuge. He who enjoys a secure refuge is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in a secure refuge. The Dharma is without sign. He whose consciousness pursues signs is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in signs. The Dharma is not a society. He who seeks to associate with the Dharma is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in association. The Dharma is not a sight, a sound, a category, or an idea. He who is involved in sights, sounds, categories, and ideas is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in sights, sounds, categories, and ideas. Reverend Shariputra, the Dharma is free of compounded things and uncompounded things. He who adheres to compounded things and uncompounded things is not interested in the Dharma, but is interested in adhering to compounded things and uncompounded things. Thereupon, Reverend Shariputra, if you are interested in the Dharma, you should take no interest in anything. When Vimalakirti had spoken this discourse, 500 gods obtained the purity of the Dharma eye in viewing all things. Of course, that always happens when Vimalakirti gives a teaching. That's sort of the Mahayana teaching, but I just thought it was good luck to start with that, because it sort of loosens us up a little. You know, sort of with the Dharma, to grasp it is something that is sort of not so easily graspable. Now, I thought tonight, in talking about the Dharma, that I would talk about it in terms of several different formulations. The first formulation is called the Four Noble Truths. The second one is the Three Wheels of Dharma. And the third one is the Three Vehicles. So those are the framework sets of things that I'm going to talk about tonight. Four Noble Truths, Three Wheels of Dharma, and Three Vehicles. When the Buddha used to teach the Dharma, it's called in Buddhist lingo the turning of the wheel of Dharma. Anyway, there's a wheel of Dharma always on the front door of every Buddhist temple with two deers looking at it, looking at the wheel of Dharma, which symbolizes the first teaching where the Buddha taught in the Deer Park in Sarnath near Benares, where he first turned the wheel of the Dharma. And the metaphor of the wheel of Dharma, it connects with the royal wheel of power. The symbol of a king in ancient India was a wheel, which meant the chariot wheel. And so the wheel of the Dharma having a wheel meant that it is sort of more powerful than secular authority, really. The Dharma has a more powerful authority. And I always think of it, though, as kind of also like a water wheel or a wind wheel, where it's just something that, in a way, they say that the Buddha doesn't teach anything at all, really, either, but just the desires of beings go towards the Buddha, and then this turns the kind of wheel, which is a sort of churns up the confused energy of the beings and turns it into illumination, turns it into light for them. So it's sort of a multiple kind of metaphor, the wheel of the Dharma. Dharma has an ancient meaning in Sanskrit in India. Dharma in Hinduism means something a little different from Dharma in Buddhism, although Dharma in Buddhism keeps the range of meanings that they had in Hinduism. Great Buddhist pundit in the 5th century, Vasubandhu, said that Dharma has basically 11 meanings. And the first 6 or so were the old meanings in Hinduism. And it comes from the root dhr, which means to hold. And the original meaning, therefore, in Hinduism, one of its meanings was law, for example. Because law holds your behavior in legal patterns, or it's supposed to, right? Another one is duty, because duty, you follow your obligations, your duty to your family, to friends, to society, to your class, and all that. Duty or obligation is another meaning. When in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna tells Arjuna to do his duty, do his dharma, he has his warrior's dharma. That means his duty as a warrior. And it can even mean a thing, actually, dharma. In other words, a sort of an organized thing that has a sort of distinguishing characteristic, dharma means. Like a pillar is a dharma, a category, kind of like that it can mean. Then if you go a little further, you can then take it to mean religion in the sense of a pattern of beliefs or a pattern of behaviors that holds people's sort of thoughts and actions in a certain lawful pattern where they want to, they do things according to their belief system and they follow according to their ritual practices. So all of those things are what my old sociology teacher used to call pattern-maintaining meanings, relating to the root of the word dhr, the verb, which means to hold, something that holds things, you see. Now the Buddha came along, though, and he exploded those meanings. And he said, my dharma has a new meaning. And he started adding a new range of meanings on the dharma. And he redefined the holding. He said, what my dharma does, what the Buddha dharma does, is it holds you free from suffering. It holds you apart from suffering. That's what my dharma is. And then that range of meanings, it means teaching, which is different from law. Law, indoctrination might be law. You would just learn the laws, and that would be that. But teaching means bringing out from within you some sort of understanding. Therefore, it can also mean the path that you teach. And the path, again, means something that you travel, and in traveling that you become free. Then it can mean the freedom that you reach itself. So it means nirvana. Dharma, the synonym of it is nirvana, which is the freedom from suffering. And so it can mean truth in the sense of the truth that makes you free. Truth, not truth in the sense of dogmatic proposition that you just have to agree to or that you just have to submit to, but truth in the sense of a liberating reality that makes you free. And so reality itself, ultimate reality, is also dharma. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, you see, the good news was, for the Buddha when he attained enlightenment, was that he was not looking for religious truth, actually. He had tried to look for religious truth, and he had found religious teachers, and he had practiced their teachings, and he decided that the places they reached by practicing those teachings were incomplete, were imperfect, were not really liberation. He reached the realm beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. He reached the realm of absolute nothingness. And he thought that neither of those realms were good enough, that you could sort of dissolve into them, but since you dissolved into something, you would eventually fall out of it again, and then that would be a huge bring down. So he wasn't scared of nothingness, but he just thought that nothingness would do nothing for him, in the long run. And it is actually a danger. Any of you who are really great yogis, you should be careful, If you become great yogis without dislodging the ego feeling and without coming to a new critical understanding of the relation of yourself with objects, and you learn just to still your mind and reach ever higher and higher in refined states, you will eventually come to a state of absolute nothingness, like a big yawning chasmic void will open up before you. And if you haven't developed critical wisdom by then, you will think that must be the ultimate reality. You'll sort of grit your teeth and say, okay, if that's it, I'll accept it. And boom, you go in there. And then you would have the horrible experience that you always have on the dentist's chair when you get, or any anesthetic, when you get completely anesthetized, where you feel that finally I'm going to get a little rest and relaxation now. And you start going like this, and then they're throwing you out of the chair, and it's an hour later, and they've already pulled out 6 teeth, or whatever it is. They removed your heart or something, and they're telling you to get home, get lost, and go home. You have no more insurance payment for the lying there, In other words, when you have absolute obliterated consciousness, there's no sense of passage of time. So you could be there in eternity, and then you just jump up again, and no time would have passed. And what a bummer. Imagine you become a great yogi. You go there, fling yourself into the realm of absolute nothingness, dissolve, emerge back out again 17 billion years from now, and you don't even know anybody, and you're on the wrong planet. So Buddha anticipated that, and he rejected that. And then he met the gods, too, and he found the gods wanting in their knowledge of the nature of the universe. Although they were big and powerful and playful and were having fun, they also didn't know what was going on. So he then was, bearing down and barreling on, trying to find out what was real, basically. If the Buddha had come up with a reality where beings are going to suffer forever, and there's no way out, and the world is a bummer, then he would have been kind and not mentioned it. It doesn't take, it's not a normally kind person. If that's what they discovered ultimate reality was, they would just remain silent, really. I mean, why go out and announce, hey guys, big news, you're going to be in misery forever, I mean, that would be, and then grinning on top of it, that would be sadistic. Although Buddha has been misunderstood as having said that, he absolutely did not say that. That was not at all his point. So therefore, according to the sort of way the story goes, it is comforting to us. It's comforting only in an encouraging way as we begin it, which is that the person who claimed to have discovered the total and actual and complete nature of reality, as we already discussed last time to some degree, and therefore really exactly found out what was going on, that person said primarily that reality was freedom from suffering. That reality was happiness. Reality was nirvana. That was his primary message, actually. It was not this business about suffering, this and that, although I explained how that works. But the primary thing was, it's like you go down, you look in, you look out, you develop like this super consciousness. You look inside every atom, outside every galaxy and everything, and all right, everything is all right, everything. You come up with that, you follow me, based on encountering and experiencing the reality. Not based on, because somebody says so, or we should believe that because it's religious to do so, or because it's nice. It's when it's good wishful thinking, something, nothing to do with that, because that's how you discovered it to be. Now, of course, it helps, therefore, to be encouraged to think maybe Buddha was enlightened, since that is how he reported reality. That is how he reported the Dharma in the ultimate sense, reality itself. He reported to us that the Dharma, if we do become Buddhists, we take refuge in the Dharma, in spite of what Vimalakirti said. Don't let him worry you. We do take refuge in the Dharma, but that means we're taking refuge in reality, actually, which is realistic. That's why it's called realistic view. We are taking refuge in what we can reliably take refuge in. The other great thing, of course, as I think I mentioned last time, but I'll just repeat, the Buddha did say, once he attained this knowledge, and he claimed this all knowledge, sarvajna, what they call sarvajnatva, omniscience. He said, don't believe me necessarily when I say I attained it. Instead, use whatever methods I teach from what I have attained, and if you find them helpful and liberating, then you can come to believe in me, what I'm saying. But don't just believe in me because I claim I'm a Buddha. Never follow people because they set themselves up as authority, including me. That was the second very surprising and different thing. In other words, he claimed he understood everything exactly. He claimed that by that understanding everything was all right. He then claimed that you couldn't realize that yourself just by following him in some dependent way, believing him as an authority and just believing in that. Believing in it might help you to try to work on discovering it, but in order to discover it, you have to understand it, you have to experience it. That's the methodology. Okay? So now, once he attained this, he did say one thing when he first attained enlightenment. He said, Sabjing Jotel Ösel Dumaje. Duzi tawar chuchi gornye. Sula tenjang gor mindube. Mima nagki tseldu chikborne. Of course, he didn't say that. That's the Tibetan translation, but that's the one I remember. That's the one I remember. I know it's sort of in Sanskrit, but not so easily. And that means that profound or deep, peaceful, free of trouble, luminous or translucent, and uncreated, like an elixir of immortality, is the reality I have discovered. Whoever I might show it to or point it out to, they won't understand it. Better I remain quiet and stay peacefully in the jungle, in the forest. Those are the first words that he said. And so then he just hung out, in bliss in the forest there, wandering around, getting food. The first people that he met were not the famous 4 or 5 ascetics, but he met some merchants. And actually these merchants were stuck in the mud or something, or for some magic reason they couldn't move. Their caravan became stuck. And then they saw a light from over in the forest where he was hanging out. And they thought, well, maybe we should, what's that light? Let's go see. And they said, oh, there's a holy man over there. And then they said, let's take him some lunch for good luck. Merchants in India used to do that, take lunch to holy men. That's a big thing. And then the Buddha, that was the first people to give Buddha lunch. And he did not, since he knew that the whole thousands of years of the Enlightenment tradition was to be built on the foundation of this institution of the free lunch, he didn't breathe a word to them or frighten them about suffering or enlightenment, anything like that. He just said, always give a good lunch to a yogi who is meditating in the forest, and you will have luck in your commerce, and you will thrive and you will prosper. And then he said, and by the way, if you don't like being stuck in your caravan, here's a mantra to say not to get stuck in the mud when you're having your caravan. So he never mentioned this more other teaching to them because he wanted them to carry on with business, you see. Because Buddhism always liked business and business liked Buddhism, you see. Nowadays we think business is all bad because we have the multinational militarized corporation, we have the military-industrial complex, but it's the military that is not so good as part of it. It's not the industry part. Industry, if it was an industry of liberation, industry of enlightenment, industry of happiness and pleasure, industry of gentleness, that's a good industry. That's a very good one, not bad. And it's better than, industry is a better, in Buddha's time actually, one of the reasons Buddhism was so successful is that it did appeal to the merchants. And the merchants were trying to thrive and create, develop society that could create wealth without just looting and pillaging, which was the militaristic way, you see. But the society in his time was still in the control of the warriors, who were the kings, and the priests were like mumbo-jumboing on the kings to make them feel good about all the nasty things they were doing, as they still do. And Buddha was one of those kings, remember? And then he bailed out of that, and he instead started this other thing. So the shift of the livelihood from the exchange of commerce, which is you get something you want, I get something I want, we make a reasonable deal, we come back and trade with each other another day, another year, That way wealth can keep increasing and communication can increase. That's a much better way of doing than, you and I fight it out and each one takes everything and then we can't enrich each other later, you see, because one is dead, you see. So it was a big shift that we still haven't finished really on the planet. That 2,500 years from Buddha's time till now is like this. And we're still trying to accomplish that shift and get away from militarism. And we've not really, we actually seem to be more involved in militarism than ever even today, actually, really speaking. So then he did that, he stayed there. Then finally he was looking around because at that point then he was completely clairvoyant about he had what they call the divine eye. So he knew everything that was happening all around the planet, and many planets actually. They say even, I know it's incredible, unbelievable, but that's what they say. And but anyway, he noticed that the first people he should actually give an official teaching to, kind of like a Dharma teaching, would be the 5 ascetics who he had used to hang out with when he was seeking enlightenment before he rejected asceticism. They were actually quite mad with him at this point because they said he's a cop-out, he's a wimp. They all lived together for 6 years eating 1 grain of rice a day, or 1 grain of sesame a day, and a grain of rice a week. And living in the far winter naked and in the sun and in the burning fires around themselves, this kind of thing. Really with the ribs sticking out, and torturing their bodies, in other words, generating endorphins to try to reach samadhis, this sort of thing, like ascetics do. But the Buddha then rejected that, and he went off and he had a good meal, you know. And of course, being the Buddha, he had a meal given to him by a goddess who gave him the quintessential essential rice and honey and ghee of 10,000 million divine cows. So the minute he ate it, his body completely filled out and he turned golden. It was like a super meal, you know, really like Gary Null's ultimate. And so then they were all mad. You know, the Buddha, he's washing his robe, he's all clean, he looks like clean shaven even, and he's eating, and what a bum. And they were going off to Benares, away from Bodh Gaya where he was, and they wouldn't talk to him. You know, they just were really upset. But he knew they would be the good ones to teach. They would understand. You know. So then he went over there after 49 days of hanging out, you know, and talked with the gods a little bit. And Brahma and he actually was playing really coy. If you read it, you get kind of sick of it. He keeps telling Brahma, the different gods, Indra and Brahma, they keep coming down every day, and they say, okay, you're going to go teach today? He says, nah, I don't think I'm going to teach. I don't want to teach. Oh, come on, teach, they say. So he made the gods ask him about 20 times to go and teach. Because, of course, once he was teaching, he wanted them not to get jealous or annoyed, you know. And they wanted him to teach, of course, because they wanted human beings to be more self-reliant. The gods didn't like it that the human beings blamed them for everything, you see. Because human beings have a lot of bad times, and then when they get mad at the gods. You know. Even whether or not they allow themselves to know that, they do, in fact, get mad at them. So anyway, he finally goes over there. Then when he goes there, he gives the Four Noble Truths. So that's the basic teaching of the Buddha. So that's what we want to get under our belts today, the Four Noble Truths. Now, first of all, they're called Noble Truths. Arya Satya, the word is Arya. And because they are true for a noble person, and they are not true for an ordinary person. But then noble, the Buddha redefined. Noble was at the time in Sanskrit, it had originally been a racial term, and then it had become a class term by Buddha's time. You know, there were two major divisions of races in India at that time, one of which, the Arya one, had conquered the darker-skinned ones who had been there before, about 1,000 years before Buddha's time. And then they had developed a kind of division, a domination division. And then once they were settled in that division, then the term came to be used for the upper classes. You see, no longer, because they were pretty intermingled. Really, there was no difference in them racially after a while, but after 1,000 years. But they still had fantasies about difference, and they had rigid class difference. And so noble meant, in the ordinary society, again, just like the word dharma, the Buddha gave it a new meaning. He took the word noble and gave it a new meaning, and he gave a new definition of arya, and he said arya now means selfless. Noble means a selfless person. And common person doesn't just mean someone of a lower class, it means someone who is a tsurtong, what they call, means someone who sees things only locked from their own perspective, is in other words, you know, rigidly self-centered, is a common person, is a non-noble person. They're not noble because they're only out for themselves, because they instinctually only see themselves as the center of the world. A noble person has achieved the insight of selflessness, and therefore they simultaneously see things from the other's perspective as from their own perspective. That's how he redefined it. And for such a person, these four propositions that he's going to say are true. Therefore, they're called noble truths. Do you follow? Yeah, that means they're not, he knows that they're not true for someone like me, who's an ordinary person, who is just locked in my own point of view. They're interesting propositions, but they're not really true for me. Now, for example, the first of these noble truths, the word truth, satya, the Sanskrit word satya, may not be so good as truth, actually. Because we think, it is all right, but we think of truth as kind of a formula or proposition, whereas the word satya in Sanskrit can mean that, but it more means truth as a fact or as a reality. So really they are the noble facts. It gets it away from dogma, and doctrine when you say fact instead of truth. So it's probably better. Because the early translators of Buddhism were thinking we have a religion here. What are the truths of the religion? They were thinking what are the dogmas and doctrines, you see, so therefore they translated noble truth. Which satya can be, though. But we would be better off to translate it as fact. Although one uses still noble truth because it's kind of a convention of translators that we left in. But the point is, the first noble fact, in other words, the first fact that is crucial for a noble person is that the unenlightened life is suffering. And this is where Buddha's bad rap of being a killjoy, sort of bummer, like everything is suffering sort of thing, comes from is this fact. He only said the unenlightened life is suffering. He did not say everything is suffering. It's a little confusing, though, because when he met those 5 people, he said, all this is suffering. And then later he said, well, I meant by this, the 5 life, body, mind processes of the unenlightened person. That's what I mean by this. Because when I say to you this, I'm referring to what you think of as this world, in other words, which are your 5 body-mind processes. You know, all your physical processes, your sensational processes, your emotional processes, your conceptual processes, and your consciousness processes, which include all of the realms and the worlds and the sense objects and the things you can think of, not only your subjectivities, but the objectivities around them. All of them are suffering. And why? So that was the first noble truth. In other words, what we think of as pleasure, he called the suffering of change. He called it the suffering of change because obviously it changes into its opposite. However, whatever great a meal we have, we get a bellyache afterwards. You know, whatever delicious this and that we do, we run out of it. We want more of it. It becomes addictive. It's bad for us. However happy we are in our youth, we grow old and decrepit, etc., etc. So pleasure, mundane pleasure, pleasure as something grasped at by a self-centered being, therefore dependent on some of external stimuli, dependent on external circumstances, consumption and connection and so forth. Such pleasure is changeable, unreliable, therefore inherently suffering. To a noble person who sees the full course of it, it is suffering. It is not attractive. Of course, suffering itself, pain in the worldly sense, is also suffering. That's called the suffering of suffering. Brilliant category. And then there is what's called cosmic suffering, or the suffering of creation, which means that everything, even high meditative states that seem blissful, once they are compounded states, and once they're experienced from a self-centered point of view, they are also inadequate and they will pass, and they, even though they seem immensely pleasurable, they will ultimately not be satisfactory. So this was those what's called the 3 types of suffering. Then sometimes there's the 4 types, which is birth, which is painful, sickness is painful, old age is painful, death is painful. Then there's sometimes the 8 sufferings, meeting someone you don't like, losing someone you do like, all this kind of thing. You know, they have different ways of listing the different sufferings. But those are the sufferings of the unenlightened person. This is the key point. He only announces that to signal to us that what we think of as happiness, where we spend our life seeking, which we spend our life seeking, is an inadequate goal. It will not provide real happiness. And furthermore, so therefore the suffering of the unenlightened life is kind of like a diagnosis that he gives. It's like, as long as you insist on being locked into your self-centered, instinctual, habitual way of perceiving and feeling, you will suffer. Why, he says. And then the second, that's the truth, the noble truth of origination. Where does this suffering come from? It comes from, fundamentally from ignorance, he says. People usually translate, but that's a little misleading, because ignorance, you know, can mean like, I don't know how many molecules of concrete are in that concrete. You know, but that is not what causes my suffering, the failure to be able to count the molecules in that pillar. And that is ignorance, kind of ignorance. What causes my suffering is the misknowing, the misperception. I think that pillar is something different from me, and I think that I'm something different from that pillar, and I think that I'm really existing as I feel I exist as the center of this universe. That is the source of my suffering, right? That's a very easily recognizable thing. It's not really ignorance. It's like, you don't think right now that you know that who you are, right? You know who you are, right? You don't have to look in your wallet and take out your driver's license to find out who you are, right? You know, well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm in this, and I'm in this country, and this is my name, and this, and this is that. And we know all that, right? Well, that's misknowledge, though. That is misknowledge. Are we really the sum of the labels we have about ourselves? Is that really all we are? This particular sort of cross-section of a very complex process that had infinite beginning and goes on infinitely and interconnects infinitely, but we think we're just us, you know. In fact, we knew it. And if we ever didn't know it, we would think something went wrong, something had happened. There'd been some emergency or some confusion is what we would think. So that is the source of our suffering. Why? Isn't it obvious? You think you are something special, right? It looks worried. No, we do. We think we're special, And that means we think we're really something, too. And in the literal sense, really something. We're a real something, we think. And we know since we're special and we're real, and we're just us too, we're not somebody else, therefore everyone else is different from us, right? Everyone else and everything else is different from us, right? And even when we say everything else, it scares the wits out of us. And we have all these fantasies about the enclosed universe, and back in ancient time we used to live in an egg, or a big calabash, or we had some sort of like goddess like arched over the world, or the sky was a dome, type of thing, because we didn't, the idea of being in an infinite space was frightening. We'd feel lost in that. Because all those other things which are not us. It's terrifying, isn't it? Just little you. I mean, not normally because you're an American and you're a New Yorker, right? And you can catch a cab and go here and go there. You've got your Metro card even. And so not normally. But actually, if you really think about it, infinite expanse of space, infinite numbers of aliens, weird other beings, even all the other people in the city, they all think each one of them thinks they're the center of the world. Every single other one. Even if you sit around a table, you sit in this room, everybody else in this room thinks they're the real person in this room, not you. And you know you are, of course, and that they aren't, but you also subliminally know that they think they are. So suddenly if we had like a fire alarm, we had like a mad scientist taking away the air, we had some kind of weird thing, water, glug, 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 we'd all be scrambling and fighting and worrying about trampling on each other. When the instincts the desperate instinct took over. Normally we would, after you, let me help you, but no, in the pressure we would start showing that each of us thinks we're the real thing here, you see. So in short, Buddha really said nothing more earth-shattering than if you're yourself, the only real thing that you know, and it's really only up to you about yourself, and everything and everyone else in the universe is against you, and it's a struggle, who do you think is going to win, and who is going to lose? Well, we all know that we are going to lose. Secretly, we know that. We're going to get sick. We're going to die. We're going to be beaten by this or that one. We're going to lose. It's just as simple as that. And if we have expanded our identity a little bit and really identified with like the members of our family, we're still the one little tiny family against the whole thing. The members of our town, but America's never even get that far. Not even our block or even our neighborhood or even our apartment building. We never reach that. Scuttle in and out of our doors, quickly lock them. The occasional like floor party, block party, not really. We don't really have them in New York. In New York, do we? So therefore, Buddhism is not at all mysterious or far-fetched or weird. It's totally commonsensical. If indeed it is the case that each one of us is the only being that can deal with ourselves, and we have the world and universe against us, we are really in a losing battle. Naturally, we cook up some idea that there's something projected from us, like a big daddy or a big mommy, who thinks who agrees that we're special and has infinite power. I mean, that is such a happy fantasy. To take that self-centeredness and project it and say there's a big fat self-centered being that thinks I'm the greatest and has infinite power, so get out of my way. Or daddy will get you. Or mommy will get you in some cultures, the big mommy. Theism, projecting an egocentric deity in a certain way, who likes, bursts out thunderbolts and things. It's really, it's a natural thing, though, really. It's very natural. It's understandable. Imagine, otherwise, taking stock of your situation, you versus the universe, including all the gods. Then you develop an idea that there's an absolute one somewhere that's just for you there, that loves you specially, you see. Ready to feed you with his, children and anything. I mean, it goes really extreme. We have such a wonderful imagination, human beings do. But Buddha didn't solve it that way because he didn't think that would work. And he didn't think there was such a being. He looked for such beings. Instead, what he said was, we can overcome that misknowledge. The reason that he felt released and said, Eureka, and was happy and smiling is he realized that the way he thought he was, a self-centered being apart from everything else, was a mistaken way of feeling. He wasn't really such a person. In fact, he was not really radically different from other beings. In fact, the boundary between self and other is kind of arbitrary. In fact, we and the universe are interpenetrating things. We and other beings are interpenetrating. We are all kind of part of a common pulse of existence, and even inanimate objects are interconnected with us. And we can sort of, there can be difference, playfully speaking, but there is no cosmic or ultimate difference between us and others. There's only kind of relative, conventional, playful, temporary differences that we make up actually for pleasure, for happiness, to make positive gifts, to be able to give to each other, to be able to be nice to each other, to be loving to each other. And we can do that because we basically know the sameness of each other. So he got out of this issue, didn't have to go, some of the yogis of the time were having these cosmically inflated consciousness experiences where they felt they were the great infinite being. You see, then they didn't feel nervous anymore because they were the biggest being or something like that. But there's no such thing as a biggest being when you're within an infinite frame of reference. There's no biggest in infinity. Infinity is really not bigger than anything else either. Infinity is in everything else. Infinity is in all small things too. Infinity is not a thing. Infinity is the condition of ultimate open-endedness of everything. When we realize that, apparently, now this is the thing. Now, just as an intellectual set of propositions, it makes sense, I hope, and I hope you can understand it. He said that when you realize, when your wisdom, and that he was happy and he talked to human beings because he realized that as he had been a human being, as the Prince Siddhartha, seeking truth, seeking reality, his brain, his heart, his human mind, his interconnection with all of his culture and all the other people seeking over many generations in the past, giving him kind of clues and starters, made it possible for him to understand everything. And he saw all other human beings have the ability to understand everything that they need to know to overcome their suffering. Especially they have the ability to understand the true reality status of themselves and realize that they are interrelational quanta, interrelational processes, interfluent beings, rather than isolated, rigid, separated selves. So everyone can find that out, everyone can understand that. And when they do, they suddenly feel like a burst of freedom in their heart. They suddenly feel bliss from within, bliss from the infinite, unchanging, uncreated bliss they reconnect to, they open to, a bliss that is suffused through and has always ever been suffused through and through. The bliss of reality. That heart of the being that is, I'm me here against everything, is like a heart that is like caught in a vice grip of confusion. It's like just squeezed, like a clamp. And the realization that that is a delusion then releases that clamp. And suddenly such a being is just nirvana. So then the third noble truth is the truth of the freedom from suffering. The truth that there is a freedom from suffering. And that was a huge big deal. That is still a huge big deal. And that is the Buddha's real truth. That is the Buddha's real discovery, is the third noble truth. The first and the second are symptom or diagnosis and symptom and diagnosis. The third is prognosis. This actually is a medical formulation, in fact, the Four Noble Truths. Rather than a bunch of philosophical propositions, it's like a medical form. The prognosis is you can get well. In fact, you are well, really. Unreally, you're torturing yourself and have since beginningless time done so. But as having won the human life form, which you now have won, you can actually awaken to your actual condition, and when you do, then you will be released from the drive of self-centered ignorance and all of its attendant emotions. Naturally, when you think you're just it, you're the special thing, you're the one, you're the special one, and the rest of it is just some other stuff, then you feel insecure, so you want more of the other stuff to build up yourself. So that's greed. That's desire. You want to broaden, incorporate many more things into yourself, so they'll seem to be like more of you against the rest. You see? Then someone else comes to, they want to incorporate, they're like feeling insecure, and they want to incorporate you. Then you get angry with them, you want to fight with them, then that's hatred and anger. Then you perceive as if they have more than you do. When you're the center and they're just like a piece of stuff, and yet they think they're the center and they've got more than you feel jealous. Then when you temporarily get into a good state and you're like puffed up, you feel proud. Fear, hatred, pride, jealousy, all of these come from this exaggeration of the difference between self and other, basically. Which is ignorance, which is misknowledge, as I prefer to call it. Misperception, misunderstanding since beginningless time. The thing about there being freedom is completely incredible to us, really, actually. That's why, again, it's the noble truth of freedom from suffering, of the cessation of suffering. Because it's true to a noble being. A noble being has experienced it, tasted it. They know that so. They have felt this opening in the heart, opening of the center of their being, relaxation of that tension of having to uphold something against the universe. An enlightened being, a fully enlightened being, not just an Arhat level enlightenment, but a Buddha level enlightenment, they have such a way of being that they are not required to inhale a bunch of oxygen to get it from outside. When they do adopt corporeal humanoid form, they go around huffing and puffing too, supposedly, just to make us feel that they're not weird. But actually, they don't even have, they can just, the energy is there in the subatomic deep microverses. They don't have to even breathe, actually. Breathing is a kind of selfish, I'm going to get my oxygen. Get it. I got it now. Get my hair, we think it's okay, it's not really selfish because it's natural, it's instinctual, but actually the full enlightenment overcomes, reprograms, deprograms all instincts. An enlightened being is a being that if they were locked by a mad scientist in a room with 10 other beings, and the mad scientist said there's a time lock on this door, even I couldn't change it, this is an experiment, there's only enough air for 10 beings to live in here for 20 minutes. 11 beings, you'll all die. If there was a Buddha in that room, the Buddha would say, okay guys, see you around. Stop breathing immediately without any convulsion. At least by definition. I know it's unbelievable, but they feel so good they don't even need to breathe. They're in a kind of state of walking catalepsy. But we can't imagine that. I mean, we can't imagine if we choke in like 90 seconds, And we can't imagine the idea of being really free from suffering. So there's a huge, and therefore once we can't imagine it, we can't strive to achieve it. We won't give up, our spending all 23 hours and 59 minutes of the day making money or gaining pleasure or fortifying ourselves against this or that or whatever it is we do with most of our time, staking off this individual space against the rest of it. We won't want to give that up to achieve something which we can't imagine to be achievable. That's why he said the third noble truth is really important, because we have to stop and think about freedom. We have to really develop the effort to imagine it. We have to remember times when we were a little free of something, when we felt a little bit freer, and then we have to realize that. And actually, of course, like everything, infinity, or as he later calls it, emptiness, voidness. But the great healing concept of all time, of everything, is infinity. If you just meditate every day about infinity, life will be immensely better. Really. Infinity is just awesome. Because every feeling of doom, every sort of certainty about this can't happen and that can't happen, is dissolved by infinity. It dissolves absolutely everything. That's why we're afraid of it, of course, because we feel that all certainty will dissolve, and we feel attached to our narrow little certainty that I'm going to keep this little bit here safe for another 10 minutes, which the next 15 years or 10 years or 5 years, whatever I manage to live, that'll be like 10 minutes. It'll be like 1 minute when I get to the end of it. It'll be like this, finished. Augenblick. Can you believe it? I'm 57 years old, man. I was like born like a few blocks from here. It's been like this, just like that. And at that time, I remember when I went to school, I looked at people who were 57. Oh boy, how they extended out of the way so they could fall over. And now I'm just still getting started. Hardly got started. I'd only got a few blocks away. And it's almost all over. So infinity, though, means that, that there's no limit. So if I had a little bit freedom of something more, then you take that and work on that and think, oh, I was free of worries for that day. I was free of this and that. I felt released for this time or because of that. Then if that's so, and we have infinite ability, time to develop that, then there maybe could be such a thing as infinite, complete, and total nirvana. Complete freedom. Nirvana is a good restaurant. Is it still open? I do like Nirvana. It's really my favorite restaurant. Just because when I go in there, then I think of freedom. Even if they could overcharge me, they could make bad food, I'd still be happy. As long as I had the view of Central Park South. But freedom is really important. You have to think about freedom, real and total freedom. No one thinks about it. No one wants anyone else to have it because they don't think it exists. This is the land of the free here. But what does that mean? Land of the free. Land of the free to watch Newt Gingrich on television. So that's the cessation, okay? Then how do you get there? Once you develop a little inspiration to achieve freedom, and the best way to achieve freedom is like read about the Buddha, read about the saints, read about the many histories of the enlightened beings. If you can encounter an enlightened being like the Dalai Lama or some great teacher, then you get a feeling about it. You feel maybe it is possible to be more free. So then the fourth noble truth is crucial. It's called the noble truth of the path to the cessation of freedom. Because, of course, if we just went on freedom, and we're not free, and we don't think we're infinite, and we're all locked in our self-centered perspective, it would feel very, very discouraging. And this is the thing that people do when they get a little inspiration, they try to do something in practice. It's a very big danger to avoid. They get too gung-ho and they go too hard at it. They'll go off for a big 20-year retreat or 2-month retreat, and they're going to get it right away. They've gotten all inspired, and then they get exhausted instead, and they don't get a really fast result, and then they get discouraged and think it's impossible. So you need a path. You need a systematic method slowly to move along bit by bit. So the path is like that, and the path has 8 branches. It's called the Eightfold Path. And it has, the first branch of the Eightfold Path is called realistic view. Usually people say right view, but I don't like saying right and wrong. It's rather realistic is better, and unrealistic. And realistic view is the view of the cohesion of causality, the responsible view of having there being consequences of causes, effects from causes, consequences of actions, both good and bad. That view that then makes you cool down about not doing some bad thing because there'll be a consequence. That makes you inspired to do some good thing because there'll be a good consequence. It's very, very important. The more realistic we are about causality, the better. And so that's about causality. And then the realistic view about, that's the most important one, really. The worst unrealistic view is the view of nihilism, of nothingness, or the view that there's some sort of absolute thing outside of causality that sort of can just cancel it all. The kind of projection of irresponsibility. And so that's a realistic view. Then there's realistic motivation based on that view. Since that is the case, that everything is an infinite web of causality, therefore we devote ourselves to positive causes and we try to avoid negative causes to bring forth positive effects to avoid negative effects. The ultimate positive effect is freedom. The ultimate negative effects are really bad. Bondage to the extreme. So then there's authentic or realistic livelihood. How we live. Now we go back to really practicing how we live. If we live in a way that reinforces the self-centered thing too intensely all the time, that's a wrong livelihood. For example, living by killing things is really bad, considered really particularly bad. Because when we kill another being, that's when we sort of assert the radical difference between us and them. Whether it's an animal or a human, doesn't matter. It's, by killing it somehow, it's just some cannon fodder, it's just something that you use. It's not like you. That is probably where, in our animal life forms, we develop the rigidity of the self-differentiation in order to be able to eat other beings, probably. In our predator life forms, because the predator eats everyone they meet if they can bite through the skin. And so killing is particularly bad life form. Life form dealing with liquor is bad because it makes people more crazy and unconscious, more attached to their self-centered perspective, more dangerous to themselves and others, etc. There's a long list of different livelihoods. Livelihoods that encourage awareness, connectedness, that have sort of products that benefit others. Those are the better kinds of livelihoods. Then realistic speech means speech that is truthful, that is meaningful, that is pleasant, and that is peaceful, makes peace with people, makes them happy by stopping their dissensions with each other, as opposed to speech which is divisive, speech which is false and misleading and deceiving, speech which is frivolous and meaningless, and speech which is harsh and unpleasant. Because speech is a very precious level of interaction, a level of karma interacting with each other. Speech has a very powerful effect. When we speak or listen to speech, that is when, without even as self-centered as we may be, we then share ourselves with others. And when we understand what they say, we enter their mind in a way, when we listen to them. So speech is where sort of humans become a collective being in a way, through speaking to each other. And it's because of our relative gentleness as life forms, as humans, from the Buddhist perspective, the Buddhist biological perspective, that we've developed the ability to speak to each other, to talk to each other. So speech is really, really important one. Then there's realistic effort, meaning the kind of enterprise in the positive, towards positive actions and towards especially the actions leading to liberation. Then there's two mental ones, which is realistic mindfulness, which is a very important one. These are the two meditative ones, realistic mindfulness and realistic concentration. Mindfulness and samadhi, or concentration. Those are the two at the end. And the concentration is the ability to keep the mind really sharply focused on one thing and very, very stable for a long period of time. And mindfulness is, which is a neutral tool, actually, that ability. It is not good if you use that, if you develop that power of concentration and then use it on a negative object. In other words, a mass murderer, a killer, is very good at concentrating on killing. They're very single-minded about it. So, and then therefore it's a neutral tool, concentration. It can be used for negative as well as positive, which is why it's at the end. And the first thing is a realistic view, a realistic understanding of reality, because you have to direct that concentration in a good way. Mindfulness is generally always good because it's just being more and more aware of everything about yourself, about how your mind works, how your body works, how the world works around you, more and more awake and alert. And therefore mindfulness is a very, very crucial and works really well all the time. Mindfulness. Then there's one eighth one, which I forgot what it is. What? Action, thank you. Not only action, but especially kind of action, kamanta, what it's called, terminal action, literally. Terminal action, meaning the type of action that isn't just done driven by self-centered desires or hatreds and things, but the type of action which seeks an end to compulsive action. It's called terminal action, or action that aims at liberation, in other words. One of the key things about a Buddha, supposedly, is that by definition it is a perfection of wisdom and compassion. It is a being like that. So it does not teach dogmatically like an ordinary teacher like myself, who just knows something, they read it in a book or they studied it and then they just talk about it. A Buddha teaches just exactly according to the needs of the people. And some people need one thing and some people need another. Not everyone uses most effectively the exact same thing. So he taught differently. He taught for, unlike Jesus, who was crucified after 2 or 3 years of teaching, most of the other great world teachers, didn't have that long. Many did, but anyway, Jesus didn't. Buddha taught for 45 years incessantly to all different types of assemblies in different kinds of cities, lay people, merchants, warriors, untouchables, generals, every conceivable type of person at every level of the most rich and complicated society of the time, of 2,500 years ago. And so there's thousands and thousands of Buddhist Bibles, literally. I mean, they would have like hundreds of Bibles. If they really translated all the supposed sayings of the Buddha and stacked them all up, it would be like really, would fill this, at least the area on top of this rug all the way to the ceiling of books, stacked up. And rather than one book or something, or 4 Gospels, or 4 Gospels and 8 apocryphal Gospels, or whatever the actual number is. And so ordering these things, and then he said himself that sometimes he said to people who came to him and they said, where's the self? Where's the self? He said, there's no self. Sometimes someone said, oh, I hear there's no self. And he said, oh, no, what do you mean? There's a self. You have a self. Who do you think's asking me the question? What are you talking about? So he would contradict himself. The Buddha would, but depending on different people. And then someone else would ask him later, well, why did you tell that guy there was a self? You've just been talking selflessness most of the time. He said, well, that guy was a nihilist. He wanted me to say there was no self, that he was going to understand that would mean that he didn't exist, and then he was going to go berserk. So I reminded him that you do have a conventional self, a relative self. When I say there's no self, that means your ultimate self you don't have, an absolute or ultimate, final self. Because you can be analyzed apart. You're just a relational entity. But you're a relative self. Yes, as a process, you have a relative self. And so he talked differently to different people, in other words. So there's many different types of things. Now, one way that his teachings are organized is called the 3 wheels of the Dharma. And the first wheel of the Dharma was the wheel of the 4 Noble Truths. And in the 4 Noble Truths, he seems to be more or less accepting that everything kind of exists. Suffering exists and freedom exists. And the bound person exists and the enlightened person exists. In other words, he didn't necessarily challenge from the beginning the sort of ontological status of the things he was talking about. Something like that. So it's sometimes called the wheel of Dharma, that everything exists. That is to say, both suffering and the cure of suffering. Of course, luckily the cure exists more strongly than the sickness of suffering. Therefore, his teaching was positive, that you could achieve the cure and you could become free of suffering. But still, the sickness is kind of real for those who are trapped in it. So that was this wheel of the 4 Noble Truths. The second wheel that he taught is called the wheel of the Prajna Paramita, transcendent wisdom. And it's called the wheel of the emptiness of everything. And that is more like what I read you at the beginning from Vimalakirti. It's like, interested in the Dharma, you take no interest in anything. Everything is empty of everything, sort of emphasizing. Suffering is empty and freedom from suffering is empty. Samsara is empty and nirvana is empty. And by empty, he doesn't mean non-existent. By empty, he means devoid of an intrinsic separated essence that would be self-constituting. And this is complicated, but it's basically a deeper kind of critical insight about the relationality of all things. And it also goes into this teaching which is known as non-duality, where once nirvana, it turns out to be empty, as well as samsara, then the picture that the person has of achieving freedom, that it'll be some sort of state of total being gassed out forever, disconnected from everything, is critiqued. And there's no way of staying in such a state. And therefore, nirvana actually is a way of being selflessly present in the world, according to that second wheel of Dharma, which is considered a deeper wheel of Dharma, really. It's the Mahayana, the universal vehicle wheel of Dharma. And it's where compassion comes to the fore and becomes the prime, where wisdom becomes revealed to be compassion. And why does wisdom become revealed to be compassion? Because when in the 4 Noble Truths, you're just concerned with getting liberation out of the universe for yourself, out of suffering. And you would like others to get it too, and once you are liberated and you become an arhat, you try to teach others and help them get liberated. But you sort of allow yourself to maintain the fiction of being disconnected from others and sort of seeking your own personal liberation at the beginning. And you have a picture in your mind usually that nirvana or liberation will be a state apart from everything, you see, kind of, right? Whereas in the second wheel of Dharma, it's sort of more radical from the beginning, because since the teaching of selflessness is expanded more powerfully, because if we are selfless and totally interrelational, right, that means that there is no thing that is us that is separated from every other thing, all other beings. Therefore, there is no thing that can separately go and get into a separate nirvana. Nirvana also cannot be thought of as a place where you can sort of go to by meditation or something and then sort of, do like a moonshot or a rocket shot and just get out into the stratosphere of nirvana and you're out of connection with everything and you're just free and floating in bliss, you see. That picture of it as a place outside the world is critiqued, and you realize that nirvana is empty of being nirvana, really, as a thing in itself. That nirvana means the blowing out of suffering, the unpleasant experiencing of being connected to the world. It doesn't necessarily mean becoming disconnected. It means getting rid of the unpleasantness of being connected. You follow me? The unpleasantness of being connected would be in some way where you are connected while resisting connection, fighting with connection, where it's a state of tension. If you were connected in a way where you perceived yourself, you enfolded all things within yourself in some kind of a way, because you felt yourself to be empty of yourself. Then, and you felt other things empty of themselves, so you didn't feel that you were being swallowed by anything else, because the other was also empty of being other. Self was empty of being self. The interconnectedness of self and other was simply the way that it was, that it is. Then suddenly you are interconnected in a way where there is no tension. There is no stress. Therefore, this interconnection, it becomes like the interconnected existence of yourself in reality becomes like as if reality were all entirely a kind of virtual reality. For example, like we're in this room now, we think we're awake and in this room, and our bodies are heavy and we're sitting and we're tired now, and when is he ever going to stop? We're going to go home and this and that. And we have that kind of feeling about the way we're here because we think we're really here, you see. If we were dreaming and we were in this room, anybody could like float up off their chair. The body would have no gravity. They could sort of float into another person. They could sort of put their hearing on automatic and remember what was said later and float off over that way, this way, the other way. They might rest, and they might, you understand, if we were in a dream, it would be like a much more fluid way of being here, wouldn't it? If you can imagine that we're now in a dream. Now you're dreaming that you're here. Remember your last time you had a dream, it was like you were light as a feather. You could just suddenly shift out of it. You could go home just by thinking. You didn't have to go and get in the subway and tromp along. You didn't have to say, get up and excuse me. You just float off. Float through the other person. So realizing the non-duality of nirvana and samsara, realizing liberation as a non-duality, is a way of experiencing samsara like that as if it were a virtual reality. As if that you and the other were just virtually you separate, but really the same, and yet somehow all of it transparent. You follow me? So therefore it was somehow like floating in the world, you know, and freely there, and willingly there, and doing beautiful things there, in a dreamlike way. Can you imagine that? I can barely do it, but I think I can. That is what the second wheel of Dharma is striving to teach people. And the key about that is, what is the key about it? The key about it is that still the desire to attain nirvana for yourself, although it is good, is still selfish. The nirvana that is pictured by the selfish mind as a place of the ultimate isolation and withdrawal is a reification of the feeling inside our heart now as if there were an isolated and withdrawn place in which our real essence is existing. And it's kind of the world impinges on it and it bothers it and it's sort of after it and we're worried about losing it and all this kind of things. You know? So we go off and we pray for it and we do all kinds of things about it. You know, our soul space, you know. And so the feeling that our soul would be in some ultimate state of isolation or bliss or even godhood is a selfish thing, really. And that's all right that it would be. If there was such a state, you know, the Buddhist practice, the Eightfold Path, the meditation and the holistic view, doesn't mean like suppressing ourselves and saying, I don't want to, oh, it's bad to feel I'm a self, I'm going to get rid of that. No. It means only that I feel I'm a self, and my whole life is predicated on feeling I'm a self, and I'm struggling with everything else. And so, and I seem to be losing the struggle, actually. And in the long run, logically, I'm going to lose big. So I better examine, am I a kind of self I think I am? Maybe I'm only exaggerating the way I am a self, and I'm therefore getting this whole unnecessary struggle. But I'm going to do whatever is real. If I find myself to be there really the way I think, that's the way I'll have to be. Only if I see through it the way Buddha says I will it do any good. But therefore the path is not to then accept Buddha saying there's no self. The path is to follow the advice of the Buddhist teachers in looking hard for that self. Only then when we fail to find it as a self-centered, self-absolute thing, do we get released from it. You follow me? As long as we still suspect and feel it's there, we will never be released from the being in the predicament, existential predicament of having to fight for it. Do you follow me? It's only if we were to discover it not being there. Right? It's like you receive orders, from the taskmaster. If you hear your mission impossible is this, if you choose to, if you find out that there's no one sending the orders, then you don't have to go on the mission. Although we're taking orders from ourselves all the time. Go here, do that, make $1 million, do the other, succeed, do this, fight. If there was no one really giving those orders, it was just like a hypnosis type of thing, then we would be released from those orders, you see. But you have to find out, are they really giving the order or not? Is there someone giving that order, right? So the idea for a state of being completely apart from that is still kind of selfish. If you develop then this inquiry, this wisdom, critical wisdom, that drills through like a diamond drill, through everything that seems to be a thing in itself, that seems to be a self in itself, everything internal and everything external. And then you're finally floating off, in space into formless realms, and you're coming to nirvana, and you feel that wisdom will critically look at my feeling of being in nirvana. And then you'll realize the emptiness of nirvana, that nirvana as a thing in itself doesn't exist. And when you do that, then the whole world is there, interrelated with you. And that absolute seeking self-centeredness suddenly diffuses over the whole connectedness in the world. And instead of wanting to escape to an optimal place, that whole absolute seeking energy becomes an energy that wants to make this place an optimal place. You follow me? The absolute concern, the absolute quest, diffuses over the whole interconnectedness of the relativity and wants to make the relative universe a blissful place. Since the relative universe is filled with a lot of unblissful beings, that then becomes compassion, because that energy wants to then help those beings find their own bliss. You follow me? Naturally, because you are those beings in some sense. You are and you're not, because it's a virtual reality, you see. Luckily, you're not the other being in the same old falsely concretized way in which you were yourself. Just as you have realized the transparency of yourself, you see the others and you experience them as if they were transparent themselves. The tragedy being that they are not feeling transparent, they're feeling solid and concretized. You follow me? So that's where the suffering comes from, that's vice in the heart that they have, that they're imposing on themselves. But the vice is wrapped around nothing. So on the other hand, there's no core to the vice. So on the other hand, you feel their freedom too, in the deepest point of their heart. You simultaneously feel their freedom and their compression, their tension. So this is the second wheel of Dharma, the wheel of emptiness. The emptiness of the self, the emptiness of other, and therefore the total interfusion of self and other, therefore the absolute intensification of compassion. The experience of the world as non-dually nirvana. I mean, imagine if for some reason, first of all, you had a real feeling that there is such a thing as nirvana. There is a place that is really blissful. There's a way of being really utterly blissful. And then you've had someone told you, this is the place. Here it is now, you see. And then you thought, oh no, but I feel crappy now. But this is all there is, but I'm just feeling crappy, you see. But then, it's not that you, just by someone telling you this is nirvana, or you think, oh, this is nirvana, that you're going to stop feeling crappy either. But then the energy goes into, well, why am I making a crappy experience out of nirvana? Rather than, how can I run off to some faraway nirvana? Do you follow? So it's like it's a kind of spinning around right in the spot where you are, non-duality is. To discover that it is blissful here, in the atom, every atom and cell of this here is blissful. But you know that it is, you see, that's what's great. We all do know it, you see, because we're mammals. And as mammals, we have all been in love. Or even if we never were, because we were so mistreated, whatever, we can imagine being in love. We can read about Madame Bovary being in love. We can find somebody who was in love. We can go to the movies and see somebody in love. And when you're in love, suddenly the normal stress-filled situation is temporarily alleviated, and you feel happy, at least with that one person, because you suddenly love them, that is, want them to be happy. And you somehow don't even care if they want you to be happy. Well, you do kind of, but not really, not if you're really in love. That's just a bonus if they are also in love. And so since you've had that feeling, you know that it could be therefore conceivable, because you've been using the solvent of emptiness or infinity, that you could be in love with the whole world like that. Imagine falling in love with every being in the universe. That's what a Buddha is a being who is in love with every being in the universe simultaneously. Totally in love, just head over heels. A Buddha is head over heels in love with every being in the universe. Can you believe it? So that's the second wheel of Dharma. Emptiness is the most beautiful expression in all of Buddhism, I think. It comes from Nagarjuna, the great Nagarjuna, the discoverer of the universal vehicle, which is Shunyata Karuna Garbham Biru Bijanam Bodhi Sadhanam. But especially Shunyata Karuna Garbham, that's that expression. Shunyata means voidness, emptiness. Karuna means compassion. And Garbha means womb. It's a compound. Shunyata Karuna Garbham. So it means, it could mean that you can analyze the compound in different ways, but it could means voidness, the womb of compassion. Or that the universe, the highest reality, is the womb of voidness and compassion. There are various ways you can read it. You can understand it. But it really means voidness, the womb of voidness, giving birth to compassion. And that's the second wheel of Dharma. The third wheel of Dharma backs away from a little bit that radical thing and sort of differentiates between things. Some things are existing, some things are not. It's not quite as radical. It gives people a few more handholds, and it's too complicated to explain why he felt necessary what was called the third wheel of Dharma. Then the last thing I want to just quickly go through, because I said I would for the day, and as we're all doing the whole Dharma in one day, this is something called the three vehicles. And these three vehicles are called Shravakayana, the vehicle of the disciples, or really the vehicle of the monastics; Mahayana, the universal vehicle, or the vehicle of the society, or the vehicle of the messianic vehicle, I sometimes call it. The vehicle where the practitioner feels connected with all beings from the beginning and seeks the enlightenment of the whole universe from the beginning, rather than just the enlightenment of the self. And then the third vehicle is the vehicle of the Vajra, of the thunderbolt, or the diamond, or the certain type of scepter, the Vajra scepter, the vehicle of the apocalypse, I call it, the apocalyptic vehicle. The vehicle that reveals the diamond thunderbolt of the energy of love and compassion within the core, strong force of every atom of the universe, instantly stripping away all kind of superficial realities of time and space and history and conventionality and suffering and bliss, even ordinary bliss is the opposite of suffering. The Vajra vehicle that's sort of grounded in the immediate possibility of fulfillment of all beings, therefore apocalyptic, revelatory. And these three vehicles, the Buddhists feel, were all taught by the Buddha. Although scholars feel that they just developed themselves within the Buddhist tradition over 500-year intervals. 500 before the Common Era was the Buddha with the monastic vehicle. 0 of the Common Era was the universal vehicle, the Mahayana, developed by later Buddhists, especially Nagarjuna. And 500 after the Common Era, the Vajrayana, the Tantrayana, the esoteric vehicle, was developed also by Nagarjuna, but they think that's a different Nagarjuna. The Buddhist Nagarjuna lived for 625 years. He only ate pills. He only ate like some sort of elixir pill. He didn't eat food. But they don't believe that, so they think it's different Nagarjuna. Anyway, the Vajra vehicle, the esoteric vehicle. And those three vehicles are all unfolding the exact same thing. The original monastic Buddhism teaches the Tantrayana, really, if one understands it. The Tantric vehicle teaches the monastic vehicle. They're totally interconnected. They're sometimes falsely presented as if they were in contradiction with each other, but they're not. Although, finally, as I was said the other day, but as I always say, there is not only just three vehicles in Buddhism. There's infinite numbers of vehicles in Buddhism. Infinite vehicles, because there are infinite living beings. Each one of you has your own vehicle that you put together, that the Buddha creates for you. Because Buddhism is not a generalized sort of faith or religion. Buddhism is a process of education. And so anybody who goes and undergoes and brings out from within themselves their wisdom and their compassion and their kindness and generosity and their happiness, by going through that process of education, bit by bit, brings these things out, bit by bit, systematically and gradually, they evolve their own vehicle to do that with. They ride on that vehicle. And that vehicle is their own positive evolution, in which they so slowly see themselves and their world change. Okay? So that's the Dharma. Thank you.